dear listeners. Welcome to the first episode of the Infinite Library Spring Semester 2026. We're reading The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Guinn. This is a personal favorite of mine. John had somewhat more mixed feelings on it, but together I think we had a pretty great episode about what the book is doing well, what the book could do better, and how one wants to present sort of world building in a sci-fi context while still making a political point. This is the first episode in our woke season. We're calling it The Infinite Library Goes Woke. Woke 2. We're making books woke. We're going to try to read no straight white male authors. So this is the first one. We're going to follow this up with Samuel Delany's Trouble on Triton, which John and I are both super excited to talk about. And Delany comes up a lot in this episode, as you'll see, because we read Delany's response, close reading, engagement with Ursula Guinn's book the essay was called To Read The Dispossessed, which we talk about in this episode. So yeah, great episode. As John says somewhat in this episode, an ambiguous episode for a book whose subtitle is An Ambiguous Utopia. And by the way, don't forget to give us a follow on Spotify, YouTube, Blue Sky, or wherever you get your podcasts. As always, we hope you enjoy the conversation.
One of those things I feel like this feels like kind of a weird episode for me because I read the book and then I immediately read an essay that said everything and more about the book that I wanted to say. And now I feel kind of at a loss for what to say that isn't just, as Samuel Delany says in his wonderful essay, Reading the Dispossessed.
I love that. I love that you're like, oh, it's like I've never read any of Delany's nonfiction. It appears that the title is a reference to Althusser's Reading Das Kapital, and you just go, whoa, yeah.
It's just all of a sudden you're on a roller coaster.
Yeah, exactly. There's Russian formalism. I guess the French version is being used. Foucault and Lacan.
Yeah, the bit where he's like, Vaught is paralleling Proust, and whereas Le Guin is paralleling Burroughs.
Yeah. I love that bit because I've often thought, what if I wrote an Austro-Hungarian novel that was set in space, where it was the glories of alien Franz Joseph, and it's actually Delany would just have my shit pegged from day one. So.
And I'd love to read that.
I mean, it's fun to think about because it's although I feel like after reading the Delany essay, I'm maybe it's not worth trying because I can't remember if he's positive or negative about the older forms of fiction writing being present in science fiction in some extent.
I don't feel like he's negative about it. I feel like it's just kind of this thing where it's it's somewhat inevitable, but can we move past it?
Yeah.
Is that possible? Or I don't know. I think that he's clearly writing from a place of I'll say artistic radicalism. I'm not going to speculate on his politics too much. But he wants to see how, again, it's like you said, is a new novel possible? Can the novel actually evolve past its roots in this kind of narrow, form? Can it evolve into something new and different? And jury's still out.
Who's to say, really? Yeah.
Welcome back, ladies, gender ambiguous, and last of all, men. And after that, straight white men. That's right. Back of the line, buddy.
Yeah. They can no longer listen, actually. If you're a straight white man, you have to turn this podcast off right now.
That's right. It's the new season of the Infinite Library. Welcome to our spring semester. We're going woke.
We're bringing woke back.
Yeah. Ben, I know we've talked a little bit about kind of what we're aiming to do this season, but long story short, last season, just because we did, I guess collectively speaking, like 9 episodes of all straight white men, in the form of, or I guess 10 if we count the Major Arcana episode. All but like one episode last season was on a book by a straight white man.
Yeah.
And we realized, Ben, I think we've done a fair job. I think there's always room for improvement, of course. We've done a very fair job kind of trying to be very balanced in terms of the authors we choose to talk about here on the show. We've talked about people from all over the world, all different gender identities, sexualities, races, etc. But we really decided that after, again, kind of a very like straight white Anglo focused season back in the fall, we really wanted to, I don't know if I would call it a course correction exactly, but we kind of wanted to really center that attempt to really show a little more breadth and depth to the books we talk about. And so we've decided we're doing a season with no straight white men involved whatsoever.
Well, yeah, and after all, John, the library is infinite, so it would just make sense to do that. And I also feel like it was funny because I don't know if we even realized what we were doing with the last season until we were in the middle of it. You might have mentioned we're just reading all straight white guys. It was kind of like a whoops, so it's it's important to realize, and to reflect on your reading habits and be it's probably good to read more diversely just to see what's out there as opposed to just kind of unthinkingly pick things, no matter how interested you might be in them. So,
yeah, I mean, I don't think we did anything wrong per se. We just decided to do these two series back to back, and I think they both ended up being great series. But yeah, I think no reason not to highlight some different kinds of voices here in the spring. So yeah, we're starting off with a bang. We have today's episode, which is going to be discussing Ursula K. Le Guin's maybe one of her best known books, The Dispossessed, An Ambiguous Utopia. And then we're going to be following that up in 2 weeks here with Samuel Delany's Trouble on Triton. We're going back to the Big D, and we're talking about his novel, which was written at least partially in response to this book that we're talking about today. So I think it's going to be a pretty fruitful conversation on The Dispossessed and Trouble on Triton. I think that's going to take us forward into the season on really good footing. I think that we're both, while we're trying to highlight authors from different backgrounds, I think we're both, trying to make sure we're also, really treating these books not as necessarily artifacts of tokenism, but really trying to give them the same kind of interesting critical reading that we give everything we read. So yeah, you can look forward to that, listeners.
Yeah, otherwise known as comparative reading, or just trying not to take certain things as being weird or different just because. So yeah.
All right. Well, Ben, where do you want to start off with? Or I guess before we get into that, Ursula K. Le Guin, pretty big deal as far as writers go. I literally have an Ursula K. Le Guin t-shirt, which I for some reason didn't wear today.
That rocks.
I guess I could go change, but that feels like too much trouble at this point. But she's a pretty big deal in kind of the literary world. Ben, do you have much of a relationship with her?
Well, so I feel like if you're going to talk about 70s sci-fi, I feel like she's one of the most, we could say, as you said, well-known, easily referenced. I feel like the most people I know have read her. And I've really only read Dispossessed and Left Hand of Darkness, but I was assigned Dispossessed. I had read it before, but I was assigned to read it in a master sci-fi class. And I think the thing that's interesting about her is she has some training as an anthropologist. I believe one of her parents is one. And I think she doesn't do this in all of her books, but I feel like that anthropological approach to building science fictional worlds is like an extremely attractive one. It's one that really pulls people in. And to me, it's a perspective that I feel like sometimes when you think of sci-fi, you think of it's all like, yeah, like whizzing around in the galaxy on like spaceships and like, you know, there's something kind of like colorful and like pulpy about it. But Ursula Le Guin's archaeological approach really makes it feel real. Like she spends time imagining what these worlds are like, what things they take as important versus not important, how these cultural worlds are built. And that is like to me a really effective fictional strategy. And I feel like that's the thing that I feel like is maybe one of her biggest, we could say like impressions or like in like things that she's passed down to other sci-fi writers. It's like world building is kind of like a not the best way to put it. And to me, it's more like actually thinking about like systems of culture and like society and language and how they're all related. That to me seems to be like part of it. So to make a long story short, I've only read those 2 books. I like her quite a bit. I really like Dispossessed, even as we'll talk about it. It's not a perfect novel, but I do think it's quite like attractive in its idealism. And I think that to me is one of the things I take away from it. But yeah, I've only really read those 2.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, this is actually my first contact with her, I guess we'll say science fiction work. I've read all of the Children of Earthsea books.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Really like those. They are books that, despite the fact that I did not read them till I was an adult, really took me back to kind of that feeling of reading, falling in love with reading as a kid. They're books that I'm kind of surprised I did not encounter when I was younger because they feel like things I would have loved. But obviously, better late than never. But I will say, I'm just gonna put my cards all out here on the table, Ben. I didn't dislike this book, but this very much felt like a type of science fiction I don't enjoy a lot.
Would you say it's the like archaeology thing, or is it something else?
So, I mean,
or anthropology might be a better way to put it, but yeah.
So it's interesting because, I feel like Le Guin kind of curiously she's like a science fiction writer that I feel like people who don't like sci-fi like tend to not. I don't mean this in a bad way. Actually, I think it's interesting because for reasons I'll get into, but I feel like a lot of people who just like literature in maybe like a more literary fiction sense, like Le Guin is one of those authors who feels like they do cross over, despite the fact that her books don't necessarily feel like lit fic to me in any particular way. Like this is just straight up sci-fi ass sci-fi. It's all made up names and like zip warp drives and the Ansible. Flippant about the language there, but you get what I mean. Like this is not sort of a literary fiction with like a veneer of like lasers and UFOs on top. Right. Like this is science fiction. But I also think that like, at least for me, this novel feels like it kind of embodies some, I don't want to say it's like the worst example of these things, but when I think about science fiction, I don't like reading. Books that feel like very didactic, more concerned about, just spouting ideas at you rather than having like a compelling plot or interesting characters. Like this feels a little bit like that. Again, the worst example of that, not the worst example of it. But I think that, again, and this is just, this is taste, obviously. I'm not saying any of this is objectively true. But I think that anthropological lens she takes, that tack, I don't think it's a bad thing by any means. I think that there is a way that it gives her a unique way of trying to construct the culture she's looking at and like, comparing and contrasting. But I also think that it can, like, if you're not careful, it can zoom you out too far and all of a sudden your characters just become kind of mouthpieces for these sort of more broad ideas about culture, and they don't feel particularly fully fleshed out or real as people on the page. And, maybe that's fine. Maybe that is maybe that's just the reality of reading science fiction with big ideas, is sometimes you are going to have characters who just need to be animatronic Hall of President characters that just kind of, yeah, 7 years ago.
Yeah, it's the Odo robot. Yeah, so yeah. Honestly, I get that entirely. I don't mind that as much, just because I feel like I'm okay with the book being like, what's the word I want? I feel like it sets up like a dialectic thing, and it's just like, here's one side of the point, here's the other side, and it's just kind of doing that more than like compelling characters or like a plot. And I don't particularly mind that, but I have more tolerance for like, fucking Robert Musil. Like, that's all of his book is. So I think that might be my proclivities, but I also totally understand where you're coming from. So
yeah, I think the dialectic aspect is interesting, and I think the way she structures this book, for those who haven't read it, the story's told non-chronologically, with alternating chapters, one taking place on one planet, one taking place on the other planet, all following kind of the life story of one particular person. I think that does create, like you said, a very like dialectical structure. However,
yeah,
my big caveat there is it does feel like it kind of elides the fact that at its heart, this feels like a Bildungsroman to me.
Right. Yeah.
And so that feels kind of like it is like a little bit of just kind of like shifting the pieces around, but still basically doing a Bildungsroman, but a Bildungsroman of a not particularly interesting or well-developed character.
Yeah, a 40-year-old alien who is also Robert J. Oppenheimer, or whatever his full name is. Yeah.
And, I think that there are also areas, and I think we're going to get into this in particular, where that anthropological lens, I think, lends a certain amount of like authority to like what ideas that are actually not very well considered.
Yes.
I think there's some very interesting and kind of weird stuff in this book around gender and sexuality in particular. But I think even more broadly than that, just sort of you're zoomed out so far that it feels like sometimes she can just kind of say something to you and never really like give you a firm grounding of like why a thing is, or how it actually is supposed to work from like a more sociological perspective. And I know I'm kind of maybe sounding a little contradictory right now, saying that like I want better plot, better characters, but also I want the world to feel realer. And I mean, that is contradictory to some degree, but I feel like this book just feels like it's kind of in an unhappy middle. I feel like there's not quite enough of either for me to feel totally satisfied reading this.
Right. And I think it would be worth it to say just up front also that in this science fictional world, there is largely a like capitalist Earth planet, although it's not Earth. And then there is a anarchist socialist moon, which is organized around principles of like anarchic socialism. And as you were saying, John, I think in attempting to do this sort of anthropological presentation of both of these equally, it's not particularly equal. And in fact, in both of them, we might say there are things missing. And I think like we can get into what those things are, but the plot largely, which is the Bildungsroman John was talking about, is that Shevik, who was born on the socialist moon, is a like genius physicist, like not like Oppenheimer level, but not like bomb related. He's going to present a unified theory of relativity in which classic Newtonian physics called, I guess, like, what was it? Not simultaneity. It's like sequentiality.
Temporalist.
Yeah, temporalist. Like, A implies B, like causality, with quantum physics, which is called simultaneity. And he's going to bridge these two things, but he can't do it on the socialist moon because, wouldn't you know it, there is no freedom of speech or freedom of intellectual labor. And so he goes to the capitalist planet to maybe try to work there. But to John's point, he then realizes that I can't actually do anything on this capitalist planet. This capitalist planet sucks. And I'm now going to go back to the moon, basically.
Well, specifically, he finds out that he thinks he's found freedom on the capitalist planet, only to realize that they're trying to use his discoveries basically not to create weapons exactly, but as a tool of like imperial expansion.
Yeah, to create faster ships.
Yeah. Faster than light travel. The setting here is they've achieved near faster than light travel, but not faster than light. And so space travel takes years, if not decades, to get between. We're told there are 9 known worlds, which includes our Earth, as well as the kind of planetary dyad that the book is centered around, which orbits the Tau Ceti. So yeah, we have our 2 planets. You could almost say that they become characters of their own.
God, I mean, it's true. Yeah.
So yes, we have Annares, which is the socialist, anarcho-socialist moon planet or planetoid, and then we have Uras, which is the capitalist, sort of more. It's the capitalist planet. What am I saying here?
I mean, like, I guess, yeah, I kept thinking if there was something else going on, but it's really just like the capitalist planet. And like, because it's Le Guin, you know, in the moon planet, to be more central is a desired value, but on the capitalist planet, to be higher is a capitalist value, not to be more central.
Yeah. So in way of a little background, so the kind of setting here is that like a little under 2 centuries ago, a group of these anarcho-socialist, basically refugees, they fled Uras to Annares, fleeing political persecution. They're followers of a thinker named Odo.
Yeah.
Who kind of postulated this anarcho-socialist, almost, you know, but kind of, there's almost like a spiritual element there too.
Yeah.
Maybe like kind of vaguely Taoist or Eastern spirituality kind of folded into anarcho-socialist thinking. They fled to this moon, and it's been about, I think, 170 years since the settlement of this moon by these refugees. And there's very little contact between these 2 worlds. There's a lot of kind of disinformation and practically superstition. We mostly see that from the Annarian side of things, just kind of given the scope of the book. But we have our main character, Shevek, who's this brilliant physicist, and we really follow his kind of life story, you know, kind of from birth up to this point where he comes back home, following kind of this disillusionment with the capitalist decadent world below.
Also, I think it's worth mentioning, as you mentioned, John, the story of him going to the capitalist planet is interwoven with his life on the moon planet. And I think that's one way that the book attempts to make the bridging of dialectical opposites like part of the book's DNA, because Shevek is trying to bridge sequentiality with temporality. And the book is attempting to bridge his past life with his current life. Now, whether or not that was like, you know, an intentional structure or not, sometimes, as we're going to get into, strikes me as interesting, where like maybe it's one of the only ways to make the plot interesting is by doing this, even though it's, again, trying to do the thing it's talking about in terms of bridging dialectical opposites. But also through the book, we're shown that the moon planet has become rigid, didactic, dogmatic, restrictive in its attempt to carry out what it believes is the letter of the law for the anarchic socialism, whereas the capitalist planet, while saying it's all free and everything, well, I guess has its own, like, you know, detractors. And so there's a band of revolutionaries in the capitalist planet. There's also, I think, implied like the whatever the equivalent of the USSR is on the capitalist planet. Like, that's the one where the guy goes like, yeah, everything's controlled by the state. Like we you know, it's not anarchic. And like, I just imagine him being like the one Russian scientist who's talking to Shevek, and then it's like he was recalled back to his land or something. Like, he just exits the narrative after he makes his point to Shevek that like Shevek's being used basically. And so like there's an attempt to show like how each has a dystopia within the utopia. And like, I particularly like this part of the book, even though I think in attempting to do that, it's, as you were saying, John, like cutting a lot of corners in terms of what it's like trying to do with its fictional worlds. So
Yeah. So the subtitle of this book is An Ambiguous Utopia. So I think actually maybe let's take a little time, Ben, to discuss the utopia aspect here. Because I think that, again, while I have some critiques, obviously, I think that this is clearly, a big point of why Le Guin is writing this book. She wants to show us this society and kind of make us wonder about like what is I think to some degree like what is freedom worth? What is, how free can a human being be?
Yeah.
I think these are like the bigger questions she's trying to ask. I do want to say before we get any deeper into this, I did want to just take a second to shout out an essay that I read today prior to this episode. That would be Samuel Delany's Reading the Dispossessed, which is
to read The Dispossessed.
To read The Dispossessed. You're right. I'm sorry. Which is an essay that I read after finishing the novel, and there were a lot of things I was feeling that I couldn't quite put into words. Right after finishing the book, reading this essay helped concretize a lot of those critiques for me. And when I do feel like I'm cribbing from Delany, I will make sure to give the man his props. So I will probably be referencing that essay at certain points over the course of this conversation, and I just wanted to be transparent and honest about that fact.
Well, it is worth mentioning just about this essay, so we don't derail ourselves further, is he takes The Dispossessed extremely seriously. And the reason I was stressing that it's to read The Dispossessed is because it's actually a reference to Althusser's To Read Das Kapital, which is a collection of essays like trying to use Marxist capital to talk about stuff. Anyway, he takes The Dispossessed extremely seriously. Well, I'll just say that now. And like, again, it's a book that he wants to excavate what he thinks is good, as well as point out what he did not like. So, yeah.
It's an amazing essay. Heartily recommend it. It's probably one of the best works of literary criticism I have read this year, which obviously hasn't been very long, but I'll say in the last year. But yes, so let's talk about Annares a little bit. I think that any further conversation in this book does require us to kind of explain what happens there, what kind of the society looks like.
Yes.
And I think that's going to be really important to anything we do going forward, because I feel like Uras, the capitalist planet, I think this is maybe again one of those weaknesses. We go there and it kind of feels like, oh, this is basically Earth. Like, just imagine Earth. Like, Annares is the section where it's like, okay, this is where she's showing us something different.
Yes. Yeah.
And something that is supposed to feel like totally alien to us, or supposed to get us thinking about, what can the world be like? What kinds of societies can human beings build? So we have, like we said, this moon that was colonized about 2 centuries ago by these Odonian refugees. I think that pretty key to kind of the society that Le Guin depicts here is the fact that the planet, or the moon that they live on, is pretty materially barren.
Yes.
Dusty. It is dusty, arid. I imagine kind of like the whole planet basically being like the outback in Australia when I was thinking about it.
Yeah.
There is very little plant or animal life on the planet at all. There are plenty of fish in the seas, but there are no herbivores or even insects on kind of the surface. There are very few plants. One of the only things that human beings can farm successfully on this planet are these holum trees, which make up like the bulk of their diet.
And their clothes.
Yes. So there's kind of this monocrop agriculture, more or less. The society still kind of feels like it's trying to develop, it's only been 200 years since they've arrived. There is kind of this idea of like they're still taming the planet to some degree. People live very distantly from each other. It seems like there's not a lot of high technology present on this planet. doesn't seem like there's a lot. It seems like communication takes a while. Distributing goods seems like it takes quite a while.
There's a centralization of like computers that make sure everyone gets what they need.
Yeah. But even then, like, it seems like that's unevenly distributed. I think they say that a lot of like the super high tech computer stuff is pretty confined to not the capital city, because they don't have a capital, but sort of this original like biggest city, which is called Abernay. And yeah, so it's a society that is, on the one hand, very materially deprived in a way, but is also, because of that, very reliant on social solidarity, collectivism, cooperation, between these people who live there. What are the things, Ben, that you found most interesting kind of about this society?
So I think the coolest thing to me was the emphasis on, like, as they say, it's a saying of Odu, property is theft. And so the idea that nobody has individual property because it all belongs to everyone and everyone's resources belong to everyone. And so the collectivism is stressed so much in a way that I find refreshing, especially since we live in such an individualistic culture. And I think that's like the attempt of Le Guin to imagine like the complete opposite of like, the way America does things, for instance. And I think that leads to some of the more interesting interactions, some of the more interesting traditions, like the figure of the beggar man, where the beggar man just keeps asking for money, which is a thing nobody can give him because they don't have an exchange system. And so I love that image of the beggar man. It's like the beggar man doesn't realize to this culture that like everything he needs is already there. Like, it's like, please, I need money. Like, and so like that like image is just so striking to me, and I feel like it like illustrates like the society that she's depicting really well.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's also a really funny bit towards the end where they describe a comedic play about an Iranian businessman who comes to Annares. And he can't get it up to have sex with a woman who wants to have sex with him without giving her gold nuggets first.
Right. And so he's constantly like interrupting having sex in order to give her gold nuggets. Yeah.
It wouldn't be moral. I haven't paid for it.
Yeah. And like that's such a great way of like illustrating something by like doing the reverse, you know, like it's I know there's a name for that, but it's just so it's like an effective image to me. So
yeah, or I think one of the best scenes of the book is when it's during Shevek's childhood and him and his friends are reading about kind of the life of the woman who founded this school of thought, Odo, and she spent several years like confined in a prison. Yeah. And this is again a concept much like money that these children have like no real context to understand. The idea of like, you know, this is a society that takes freedom of movement fairly seriously. Yeah. That's problematized later in the book. We find out there's an asylum and therapy centers that seem a little bit like prisons, but right. At least at the time, these kids don't really know what like a jail is, and so they play at putting one of the kids in prison and just kind of confining him somewhere for an arbitrary length of time, just kind of to see what it's like. Yeah, and I think it's kind of funny because the kid who like they put in jail kind of ends up enjoying it.
Well, like he's like, oh, he enjoys it, and then they leave him in there like way longer than they should, and then he like comes out and there's like shit everywhere, and he's like really like distraught, and they're all just like, we will never speak of this again. Like, so like,
yeah, that's the stuff I like. I think maybe it is the more dialectical stuff that I do enjoy. The stuff that really does feel like it's creating this stronger contrast between kind of like what economic relations look like in one society versus another, and like also really like taking seriously like what does a society that does not have money look like? How is that the same and different than a society that does? I think that some of the strongest parts of the book are where Le Guin actually gets a little less idealistic about the society she's constructing. You know, we find out kind of as the book goes on that while there isn't, again, like a formal state, sort of the collective social pressures of the various like bodies of society have kind of created like a pseudo state in the background while kind of no one was paying attention.
Yeah, the state within the state. Yeah, so
like they more or less have like an army and like a police force, and the kind of production and distribution collective more or less functions as like a Politburo that gets to like decide how resources are spent, and like in situations where there's famine, like who lives and who dies,
and what like research is published as well, which is germane to Shevek. So
yeah, there's a point where there is a composer who wants to write a suite of chamber music based on Shevek's theories, and he wants to call it, the theory of simultaneity, and they won't let him publish it because it's like out of fashion, and it's like referencing these radical physics ideas Shevek's putting out there. And Shevek's like, well, what if you called it the joys of solidarity? And he's like, yeah, that would probably work.
Yeah. I also feel like fucking David Mitchell ripped that off wholesale for Cloud Atlas, because there's a bit in Cloud Atlas where he imagines like multiple people playing different instruments in a different key, but all playing together, which is like the point of Cloud Atlas. And I'm like, man, he probably just ripped that off from The Dispossessed. But also, David Mitchell loves ripping off Murakami, but that's another conversation. So anyway, yeah, it's a striking image that the fact that the composer and Shevek can't do the work they want to do, and his friend Triton, the playwright who writes that play about the Uris businessman, is like basically sent to the psych ward. like he's so socially ostracized that he becomes defensive and psychologically fragile that he gets sent to the asylum place, which no one has really heard of. So
yeah, and there's still like some degree of like, again, there's still some degree of prejudice. There's a lot of talk about the way that people who are like a little too attached to like certain possessions kind of get labeled as being propertarian.
Yeah, which is the slur. Yeah, so
kind of startling amount of sexism left.
Yeah,
in this world,
even though like, yeah,
we probably want to have like a more dedicated conversation on how this book treats sex and gender.
Yeah,
but there are a lot of moments where like we have men talking about women and kind of giving pretty, much more like sexist accountings of like women's behavior than you would expect in a society that's supposed to be so egalitarian.
Right, because as we're told, everybody like I guess like, how did they describe it? Basically, there's not a lot of sexual hangups on this planet because what is the official explanation? I guess because everyone is brought up more or less equally.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the idea here is, I think Le Guin is again trying to kind of think about what could a society look like without kind of patriarchy writ large.
Yeah.
So, again, I think that I'm going to put like my feminist theory hat on for a second, but again, it's patriarchy before anything else is a property relation. It starts with, again, men basically owning women via marriage so that they can guarantee like their possessions will go to people genetically related to them when they die.
Right. Yeah.
That's a simplification, obviously, but it's like, we cannot separate, sexism, patriarchal gender relations, marriage, all these things from like property relations, and the kind of brute facts of them. Yeah. And I think Le Guin is saying like, these are people who, want to create a society where no one owns anything. That means that marriage becomes this kind of obsolete institution. And when Shevek gets to the other planet, people talk about, people ask him like, do you have a wife? And he's like, I have a partner. And they're like, what's that? And he's like, well, I guess you would call it a wife, but right. It's different. And again, I think that is Le Guin doing something kind of interesting there where, there's no longer this property relation we call marriage,
right?
But some people still choose to enter like long-term monogamous relationships just for kind of personal reasons, particularly when children get involved. And so I think maybe there is still something there in terms of maybe, again, how radical is she imagining
right.
a break with the world here? But I think there's also an implication here that part of the reason there's so few sexual hangups on Annares is that there's so little to do for fun.
Yeah.
That essentially like widespread, some would say rampant casual sex is like one of the only forms of recreation they have.
But we're told multiple times that like people just get tired of it after a while.
People get bored.
Yeah. And like also the word for work and play is like the same on Annares. Because the society takes work so seriously because we need to work to survive, that it becomes a value in and of itself.
Well, I think that, again, that's maybe, again, kind of an ambiguity there, because one thing we do learn about Annares is they speak a language called Pravic, which is more or less like it's an Esperanto. It's a deliberately created language that is supposed to embody the values that, of this ideology of Odoism or Odonianism. And so like there are no swear words basically because there's no religion, so you can't blaspheme, and sex isn't a big deal, so you can't like call someone a bastard.
And they think removing shit is extremely important because excess is excrement, and so there's no like they don't even use shit either. So there's this ideal that people do work that they find like meaningful or important or enjoyable, but it feels like it's problematized pretty regularly, where there's also people like, you can just get assigned if they need you to like go work in the fields for like 10 weeks because we need people to work in the fields for 10 weeks. And it doesn't matter if you're a trained scientist or technician, like you're really not supposed to get like too comfortable doing any one kind of work, while at the same time you're also supposed to enjoy the work you're doing. Right, because Odu says at one point essentially the Karl Marx phrase, each according to his ability, each according to his need. Like Odu says that in some way, but it's not a value that is as you were saying, John, it gets complicated. So
okay, I do want to ask you about one other thing about their culture that I found both fascinating, but also it's one of the points in this book where like it kind of rang hollowest for me as kind of like an idea. And that's the fact that basically because like, again, their language is constructed and they're all kind of coming from this place of this refugee status. Their names are assigned them at birth by a computer, and there is only one person with any given name at a time. So no one has a surname. Everyone has a completely unique name that is given to them by a computer, like based on what names are available at any given time.
And that's the only like handle anyone has.
I like, again, it's this thing where like you say that and it sounds really interesting at first. And then you think about it like a little more practically, or again, you think about it kind of from like a perspective of human beings. And it's kind of like, well, what if two people get the same nickname? What if, how would people actually feel about having like being given names that are just random combinations of syllables, like particularly like that kind of first generation. And it feels like, again, kind of like this area where Le Guin kind of is saying like, well, these people have so like voluntarily separated themselves from kind of their original culture that like I don't have to think about where any of this stuff came from.
Yeah, like none of the Odinians are going like, remember when we were on that planet?
Well, like it seems like there's so little like cultural carryover from Urus, despite these people all having come from there in the grand scheme of human culture not very long ago.
Yeah.
It's like we on our Earth we have not had like a socialist society that has lasted for 170 years, but like people in the Soviet Union still like still had surnames, like still gave their kids names that like people had in Russia like for centuries.
Well, I wonder too if she at one point toyed around with the idea of like everyone having a similar name and then was like that won't work. And so then like the idea of a computer giving everyone an individual name is like, one of the few like tokens to individualism, like, or not tokens, but like I have to have some individualing aspect in this society so that I can tell a story, you know?
Yeah.
Like, did you ever read that god awful We, the Ayn Rand dystopian novel? And that one, like, everyone has like a number name. And like that's the thing, like Ayn Rand is saying, like, that's what the socialists will do to you, is they'll take away your individuality. God, that book sucked. Anyway, I remember I read it back when I was into reading dystopians, and I'm like, oh, Ayn Rand has one. Anyway, I think to me, John, it felt like one of those moments of like I could tell that there was an author making like decisions about like practicality, like how am I going to tell the story? So
yeah, I mean, again, this feels kind of like, I do feel like I'm picking nits a little bit here, and maybe I am, but you know, it feels like kind of this point where the society just starts to feel a little false to me. Like the fact that like there's apparently like very little art on this world apart from theater. Everything else is just kind of like samey. Because
yeah.
And again, and that like she does that to like make a critique to say like, oh, the like this anarchist society is actually pretty stifling.
Well, she's also making a capitalist critique, because the person says we don't say that the crafts are lower than art, like because art versus craft is like a gendered distinction that was probably a result of patriarchal capitalism. The idea like crafts are like women's work and art is what men do, and so that sentence even is to me more about like we shouldn't say that arts and crafts are separate; they're the same thing. But then she's like, except for theater, with theater is like higher than the crafts. Like that particular point was like almost like because it's interesting when she decides to let the society stand on its own and when she decides to use the society to make a point about our world, which I think is something Delany points out that she's very inconsistent with, like in terms of like sometimes she seems to say like, oh, like I'm using this to say something about our world, but I can't say it directly, or I'm actually creating this own world that's supposed to stand separate. So to your point, I agree with what you're saying, but I also feel like I could tell her like saying like arts and crafts shouldn't be separate. That's a gendered distinction. So, but
well, again, I get what you're saying, and I don't totally disagree. But again, maybe this is where again I'm finding myself like thinking along Delany's lines, where it's like, okay, this feels like you're it feels like there's this thought experiment going on here, and then all of a sudden like you have a point you want to make, and so you stop thinking you stop logically thinking through this culture, and like you just make an arbitrary decision that then like doesn't really feel like it's justified in terms of like what you've created so far
within the fictional world. Yeah, which as Delany says is how sci-fi is supposed to work. So no, I mean it's you know, again, I found myself thinking there's a moment where, again, they're discussing like the naming conventions, and Shevek explains like he knows a little bit about one of the other people who's been named Shevek, and she was a woman, you know, around the founding who invented like a type of ball bearing that's still used in like certain motors on the planet today. And I was like, that's interesting. Like the idea that like despite kind of removing the like nuclear family as a sort of like locus of genealogy, the fact that like you could have this kind of informal genealogy of like everyone who's been named Shevek, and like how do you measure up to like previous Sheveks, or like that guy named Shevet who beats him up. Which
for having too similar a name.
Yeah, I still don't really understand that part. Like, I sort of get it, but at the same time, I'm just like, I don't know. It's just funny that they don't have the exact name. They have similar enough names that there's like this Freudian fear of the self or something. I don't know, but
yeah. Again, it's this point where I just don't feel like the culture fully gels for me. I feel like I came out of this and I felt like I read a thought experiment, not like a fully fleshed out world.
Which I have a quote, John. This is referring to Left Hand of Darkness, though, but I think it applies to Dispossessed. So she says, talking about Left Hand of Darkness, It was a heuristic device, a thought experiment. Physicists often do thought experiments. Einstein shoots a light ray through a moving elevator. Schrodinger puts a cat in a box. There is no elevator, no cat, no box. The experiment is performed. The question is asked in the mind. Einstein's elevator, Schrodinger's cat, my Githenians, we could think my Annares, or my Odinians, are simply a way of thinking. They are questions, not answers, process, not stasis. One of the essential functions of science fiction, I think, is precisely this kind of question asking. Reversals of a habitual way of thinking, metaphors for what our language has no words for as yet, experiments in imagination. So I think, John, I agree with you 100%. And I feel like I kind of like that, but I totally understand that it leads to like inconsistent science fiction. So,
like I said, I feel like this is, again, me maybe like extrapolating my own personal taste like onto the book as a whole, where it's like, if you like this type of science fiction, I have no problem with that. I think it's like a totally valid way to write. It's just not the kind of science fiction I like reading.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, like for me, it comes down to, again, kind of like, what am I reading for? What am I reading for when I read this type of work? And, yes, I want to be shown new things. I want to think about like the possibilities of the human condition and human society. Sure. But I don't want the people I'm reading about to then not feel human because of that.
Yeah.
Like there's a way in which, the way these people talk, and again, I think that there is a degree to which the Guinn is doing this on purpose. They have this kind of different like cadence to their speech because like they don't use the possessive case very much. There's just phrasings that are off compared to like how we would say things. But there's also a degree to which like everyone, like it almost feels a little bit, again, not as bad, but like it almost feels a little bit like an Ayn Rand, where it just like feels like these characters just are there to like pontificate, and we get so little like interiority or character outside of just like a handful of qualities that maybe we're told about, rather than really shown. Like I don't really get what Shevek, like what I'm really supposed to take away about Shevek as a person. Like I understand he's a brilliant physicist, but beyond that, I don't really get what I'm supposed to like. What motivates him? Like why does he have this desire to push forward science in this particular way?
Well, I have an answer to that, and it's one that I think is not clearly explained. It's when he says he wants to unbuild the walls. That's like his one motivation. And to me,
why does he want to do that?
Yeah.
What inspires that desire in him?
Right. We're just told that he wants to do it. The idea that there are walls between people and societies and property, and that we should ideally all come together, collectively.
And like I like that, but again, it's this thing where it feels like it almost falls into like a great man trap a little bit.
I mean,
like,
the Oppenheimer thing, like she said she wanted it to be Oppenheimer, so I agree with that. Yeah.
It's just this thing where but again, like we had the movie Oppenheimer. You can tell a story about like a great science, like a world historical genius, and still like characterize him in a
John, can you
sense.
imagine the Vea scene where he actually has a relationship with Vea, and then the planet of Eros, the secret government kills her, like in the movie Oppenheimer, and that's what happens? Like that'd be awesome. So
that would have been better.
Yeah. Okay, well maybe we should talk about the Vea scene, unless you want to talk about something else, because I do want to talk about that scene.
So before we get to that, I do want to talk a little bit more about like sex and gender on Annares before we get to Eros.
Yeah,
because I think that like those two things like will mesh, and that can kind of be our like bridge to.
Okay, perfect. Yeah,
I'm talking about Eros and the plot there. So like we said, Annares is characterized as like a particularly like sexually permissive, sexually open society. Like there is like still a privacy taboo, but outside of that, there, at least as we are told, there is no particular like issue with homosexuality. People apparently start having sex relatively young without it being a big deal. Most like young people are bisexual before kind of deciding on a preference later in life, which is kind of an odd idea in some ways, but in other ways not. I don't know. And children are, I found myself a little confused about the status of children.
Yeah.
Because sometimes children like live with their parents and sometimes they're like given to like communal nursery schools to be raised without their parents' presence.
Yeah, like kind of like daycare. Yeah.
But like kind of like an orphanage too.
Yeah. I feel like the concept of like children and babies is something that comes up like later in the book, almost when there's like not enough time to me.
Yeah. Well, like, because Shevek is basically given to a nursery. Like, he knows who his parents are, but he doesn't live with them. They don't even live in like the same place as he does.
Right.
And he like reconnects with his mother later in the book.
But he's also mad at his mother for walking out on him, even though this is considered to be not that big a deal.
Yeah, it's like totally normal to some degree.
Yeah.
And so maybe, again, it just is this thing where like the motivations become a little bit unclear and muddy, especially because, again, I don't feel like I get a great handle on exactly how this works in this society. But where was I going with this? So, yeah, so there's a lot of sex. Seems like, again, it's one of the few modes of like kind of recreation that they have. It's very normal to like pair off with someone temporarily.
Yeah.
Before, you know, one or the other of you decides to kind of move along, either just to like a different partner, to being single, to so it's very non-possessive. There are some people who choose more or less to enter into more one-on-one, long-term exclusive relationships and live together more or less permanently. But it's considered to be like an eccentricity at best. On the one hand, I think that is kind of an interesting frame for how sex could work in this society.
Yeah.
On the other hand, again, now I'm going to put on my non-binary person hat. I find this all very like there's a lot of like weird kind of, I don't know if I exactly want to call it gender essentialist, but I don't quite get how sex works in this world, because
yeah,
there's a lot of sexism, despite the fact that we're told pretty upfront that like men and women don't really dress that differently. There's not like a great deal of like, women don't wear their hair differently than men do. They don't wear different clothes. They don't have distinct like gendered names. So there's kind of this thing where sex or gender is both foregrounded as something that there's still a great deal of importance put around, despite kind of the gender binary not being a well-policed one.
Yeah, and I think Delany highlights how ideally both men and women would do the same number of jobs, but actually as it occurs in the book, that's not the case. Like, there's not equal representation of like gendered labor, even though supposedly there should be.
Yeah, well, and even beyond that, there's just this idea that I found myself thinking, like, why does this language still have gendered pronouns?
Yeah.
Why are these people like, why are these people still so, I mean, hung up on sex? And it feels like, again, maybe it's the fact this was written in 1974. I'm not going to say like Le Guin is like transphobic or anything like that. I don't think that's true, but I don't know if it's just this is written at a time when people are thinking more about feminism in terms of, yeah, that kind of biological reality of childbearing in particular. You know, the reason why, you know, there's the sexist conversation between Shevek and one of his friends early on in the book. You know, his friend is like, women are naturally propertarians because they have children and they want to possess their children and they want to possess the men who like help them have those children.
Yeah, and then Shevek says, somewhat strangely, women are actually better socialists than men. Which I don't know exactly like what his evidence for that is, despite it being the same kind of like essentializing statement as the truck driver makes, or I can't remember the guy he's having the argument with.
But yeah, it's just this thing where I I'm being told that the society is like very egalitarian and does not have kind of these outward markers of sex and gender that we have in our world. And yet people like are still falling into these very neat categories of man and woman, homosexual or heterosexual. You know, there's bisexuality, but it seems like it's mostly like considered to be something you do when you're young, and then you eventually like sort into one of these two groups.
And Shevik kind of does it out of politeness.
Yeah, there's that.
I also have, I think there's maybe two interesting ways to read what you're highlighting. The first is like, and this is the big brained, perhaps too positive reading. You know, this is an attempt to show that there is, you know, a realistic aspect to this utopia. There's ways that it falls short of its extended aims. Positive reading. Not so positive reading. Second wave feminism. It's 1974. We haven't got to the intersectionality of gender yet. And there are still some need to define what is explicitly female against what is male in a way that like, raises it up to the previous level. And I feel like that kind of trickles way into the book, I feel like, in an interesting way, especially with the treatment of Bedap, the Shevik's homosexual friend, where, as Delany rightly points out, it's implied that Bedap is like ashamed of his sexuality in some way because he can't have children. That's a scene that to be honest, John, every time I'm reading this book, by the time I get to that book, I'm anticipating the book ending, that I've like blazed past that part every time I read it. And this time I read it, I was like, what the hell? Like, I wasn't sure what was like going on in that bit. And as Delany points out, it's almost like Le Guin wants to say something weird about homosexuality and children, but doesn't quite say it, and just has Bedap feeling like he's missing something when he sees Shevik with his kid. And that's, you know, an interesting scene that I think Delany rightly points out is weird. So
yeah. Well, I mean, again, I think that maybe this gets down to like my core critique again, and I think one of Delany's core critiques, and that is that, again, there are these moments where it feels like Le Guin is trying to posit this new society, but then for one reason or another, she comes up against some kind of resistance in herself, and she falls back. Towards something more familiar. You know, that scene with Bedap where he sees Shevik and his daughter, and he feels sad because he's like, they're sharing this like form of intimacy that I can never know because I'm gay and I can't have kids.
Right.
Which Delany quite rightly points out, like, you can be gay and have kids.
He's
that's not even weird now.
He's like, I'm in a group of gay people with kids. Like, he's like, we meet every week or something. He like basically goes into detail.
We take all our kids out. We hang out as gay dads.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has a great line about how is Annares truly less progressive than the Upper West Side of Manhattan.
I love that the intro to that essay was like, Ursula Guinn said that she was tired of like confessional writing and testimonials, like we need new forms. And then in that essay, Delany quite readily gives plenty of testimony and confession. like he's like, actually, it's still important to do these things. Like, but what I was going to say was that, so it feels like, again, this moment where rather than thinking maybe a little more critically about like the nature of parenthood and like what would parenthood look like in a world with no, again, like property relations of this sort, she falls back kind of into the sentimentality where it's like, oh, despite the fact that we've gotten rid of the nuclear family, like your biological parents, you do just have this like magical connection with them. And if you can't have biological children, there's no way you could ever understand that. Right. And I mean, this is a sentimental book. I won't put that, like, there's quite a lot of sentimentality in this book, which I'm okay with. But I also at the same time realize like it's a little like it's just the way it is, you know, like that kind of stuff. So,
again, and I don't think any of this is like this is a bad book because of that. I do not think this is a bad book. I feel like I'm being critical, but I'm being critical, I think, in the way Delany is, where it's like, I want this to like, this isn't quite giving me what I wanted when I sat down to it. It feels like there's just these moments where I just feel like I come up to this precipice of like wanting to see something new and just not quite getting it.
Yeah.
You know, again, like with the gender stuff, there's this moment where it's like, okay, what does a world where like the sexes are no longer like rigidly divided look like? And Le Guin seems to think like, Oh, well, men and women just are kind of different sometimes. And like, there's always going to be some kind of conflict there.
Yeah.
Again, maybe even if she's not positing like a literal biological difference, which I don't think she necessarily is, because in my reading of Le Guin, she's always been very critical of this idea of like, oh, there is a natural like biological difference between men and women, but just like, oh, because of like childbearing or something, like there's always going to be like some kind of conflict between men and women, and like they're always kind of not going to get each other at some level, and that just doesn't quite go as far as I'd like it to. I want there to be like a more serious reckoning with like, what does getting rid of gender mean? Like what is totally like decentering it in society? What does that actually do? And I just don't feel like Le Guin quite answers that question like a way I found compelling.
Yeah, and it would be just as easy to kind of conceptualize parenting as something that like an entire group of people does, as opposed to just two people. Like that would
well,
fit.
And she kind of does that, but then she kind of backs off it at the end. And again, maybe this is an attempt to like make Shevek like, again, kind of pointing out how he's different, but we spend all our time in his shoes. And so like, I don't feel like I get enough of a sense of like what the norm is and how he differs from it, because he's also kind of given to me as the exemplary member of this culture.
Well, yeah. And in the bit where he yells at the Terran ambassador, he's like yelling at us. Yeah. So like,
well, and there's also, you know, I think there's an interesting critique of this book too, where it's like, despite I think a lot of people holding this up as like a very feminist book, all the women are like paper thin cutouts.
Yeah, and like, I mean, Shevek's partner even says that like having a baby made her into a propertarian.
Yeah,
which
and yeah, his partner, I think her name is Tekvar. Or Tevkar?
Or Takover? I wrote it down. Yeah, hold on. It's hold on, I didn't write it down. I was like trying to remember this earlier and then I straight up forgot. Yeah, it's like Takvar or Tekavar, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, she has like very few desires outside of just like caring about Shevek. Like it's not even, and it's not even like in a. Oh, go ahead.
I mean, she does like her fish. That's like her other thing.
But it's not this thing where like it doesn't like it feels like a thing where like she has to give like a job that she does like as a character descriptor. But like, why is that her passion? What does she do that like illustrates that to us, or are we just told it? And you know, how does that? You know, it feels like again, Shevek just walks back into her life at various points in the story, and she's immediately just like, "Oh, Shevek, great, I love you."
Yeah, Delany has a great point where it was like, wouldn't have Takvar just kind of been like seeing other people? Like it's like she just kind of hung out with this kid for however long he was gone.
And so it's this point where again, it's like you're telling me the society works this way, but then the characters don't comport to that in this way that like makes it feel like I don't quite get what's going on here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I just want to say one last thing. I do like that the book seems to imply a better version of itself, which I think is like one of the points of the book. Like the idea of having like a set of ideals that you can't reach. Now, I think that's like intentional? I don't think so, but I think there's a way in which like the dispossessed implies like the ideal dispossessed, like, which is sort of what the characters like talk about a lot. So I don't know. But
well, I mean, I think you're onto something there, and I don't necessarily know if what you're saying about like a better version of it kind of being implied is true. But I do think that like I think that Le Guin is, again, if we're going to be charitable, Le Guin is like, I think trying to ask like, how far can ideology go? Like how, like what are the parts of human nature that are like alterable, or, you know, we can kind of shepherd in various directions. You know, I think that, you know, this is not a book that's positing like, human beings are naturally exactly like this. But, you know, I think that like, if it's making a point, it's that human nature is contradictory, and we want things like we want mutually exclusive things that we can't have. We both want to like be free and be stable. We want to both like own things and to like share everything. We want to be selfish, but we also want to be pro-social. And, you know, the purpose of society more or less is to like find a way to try to manage those tensions between our mutually incompatible desires, you know, our eros and thanatos.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that there's also just a degree where I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
She can't like quite like
it
be
just
consistent.
Doesn't quite all come together for me. It just doesn't quite gel. And it feels like there's just this level where there's just so many like kind of different things going on, and it just never quite meshes together for me. And I just don't know what to make of that. Well, do we want to talk about Uras a little bit?
Yeah, we probably should, because I do want to talk about Via and the scene with Via, because it's another instance, I think, of like the like jarring thing that happens that's never quite exactly explained. So yeah.
So I mean, I guess I'll just say I think the Uras sections are weaker than the Annares sections.
Definitely.
Because I think that it is kind of the point where Le Guin kind of is grinding the most axes, I guess I will say. There's a lot of stuff in, you know, here about like academia. I mean, there's some of that on Annares too, which felt like very axe grinding to me. Maybe warranted axe grinding, but it felt very like, it felt like a little bit too axe grindy. You know what I mean?
I'm making the point. Yeah, I'm banging my drum. Yeah.
But it feels, you know, Uras like does not feel like a setting to me. It feels like, again, kind of this vague backdrop that you're just kind of supposed to backfill Earth onto.
Yeah, our world. Yeah. And some aspects are exaggerated, but not enough and not that many. So,
it doesn't feel like a distinct place. It feels like, it feels like this thing where I'm just supposed to read this stuff. You know, there are like vague mentions of like their religion, and you're really just kind of supposed to backfill like, oh, this is just basically what religion is like in our world. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. You know, women are now just displaying their breasts and they've shaved all their hair off. Because I guess that's how like female sexuality will go when extended that way, extrapolated. But
I mean, I feel like that's an arbitrary choice she's making, which is fine.
Yeah.
But that feels like one of the few like really distinct cultural features of Uras that we get. Other than that, it's just kind of like, this is like a capitalist planet. There's multiple nations. They fight each other. There's war. There's poverty. There's greed. There's deceit and deception.
Nobody wants to learn.
Poor Shevek is not used to. You have to have students who want to take your classes to keep teaching classes.
Honestly, though, that point about the grades is interesting, because I've experimented with like process grading, where you grade doing the processes presenting the grade, and it's funny how like almost half the students will go, I want the grade. Like, how will I know if I get a good job, if I don't get a grade? I'm like, well, I'll tell you. And they're just like, that's not enough for me. like, yeah. So
Shevek tries to do away with grading, and his charges rebel.
But it's an interesting thing how ingrained that is, like ranking, as opposed to like, are you trying your best? Do you think you're trying your best? You know? So
but so I think what we wanted to kind of talk about with Uras, one of the more interesting scenes of the novel, I'm not going to say it's a scene I liked, but there's a lot of interesting content there, is Shevek's short-lived relationship with a character named Via, who I think is implied to be basically kind of like a high-class courtesan.
Yeah.
Who he meets at like, you know, in these kind of soirees and parties at the big fancy university he's posted up in after he comes to Uras, after they've more or less like poached him, you know, as talent.
Yeah.
And she invites him to a party, and she's been flirting with him, and he kind of like publicly sexually assaults her.
Yeah. So like, and because he gets super drunk, he's never had alcohol before. He gets super drunk. He's trying to have this conversation with people at the party about physics, and like only one person is really listening to him. Everyone else is just trying to like score points. And then like the text like recedes to me from clarity. It's like something dark turned over in his mind, I think is what the sentence says. And then like he tries to sexually assault Via, and he's not successful. And then he like drunkenly passes out, or like they cart him away basically after that. And I think I still don't really know exactly what's going on in that scene. And I think Delany has a good way of pointing out that like, if these two people are in different ways of flirting, like on Annares, there'd be a different way of flirting than there would be on Uros, then they would be flirting past each other. So like nothing would have really happened. But also like this particular scene derailed my master's class discussion of this book, because people were saying that Ursula Guinn didn't have a right to depict sexual assault to make a point, which I think doesn't make sense to me on like a just aesthetic level. Like you can if you want to make a point, but also like to me, if that is the reading, like, oh, by the way, Shevek has now become like a rapacious assault capitalist. Like, I don't think there was enough like groundwork to lay that observation. And so to me, the other aspect of this question is, you know, when he wakes up afterwards, he's so shameful that his shame, which he has, I guess, not experienced before, or only like internally on Annares, like spurns him to solve these physics problems finally. And that we needed this shame to do that, which like, if that's the case, I can kind of buy that, but that's still not very satisfactory. So it's a strange scene that I think the most immediately effect is to make you think less of Shevek. You're like, wow, he sexually assaulted this woman. Like maybe I don't like him as much as I did previously. So I don't know. It's like it's a scene that I think doesn't work, and I still am confused about it, to be frank, to be honest. So
yeah, I can't disagree with you at all, Ben. I really did not know what to make of the scene. And
wait, did you ever you read Perdido Street Station, right?
Yes.
Do you remember when it's revealed that the bird character committed the equivalent of sexual assault on his planet, and that's why he's like, yeah, I don't know why this is
choice theft.
Yes, but in that like grad school class, we spent a lot of time discussing about like whether or not you can commit sexual assault, like if you don't know the social codes that you're in, and this is in science fiction. And I frankly just find that debate to be really irritating. Like it's like we're reading it in the world where it is sexual assault, so like it doesn't matter. Like let's talk about why it's in there as like a book. I don't know, like those two scenes have been linked in my mind because of this class, and I think in Perdido Street Station it's handled a little bit better than it is in this book. So
yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely something there in terms of like, I think what maybe fantasy sometimes can do better than science fiction. I think it's a lot easier to like kind of hand wave like social stuff in fantasy sometimes, where science fiction creates this like need for context.
Yes.
That can be much harder to like create verisimilitude for. And I think that's a weaker. Yeah, I think that's where some of the weakness of this scene comes out. I think that, again, it feels like this moment where, again, I don't quite get what Le Guin's trying to do here. I don't get if, like, it feels like kind of the point that's trying to be made here is like Shevek, again, doesn't understand social cues in terms of like how flirting works. He's taking the flirtation that Via is doing in kind of this very teasing, coquettish way almost.
Yeah.
And it makes him so horny that he doesn't know what to do. And so he assumes that she wants to just like openly have sex with him the way that they would on his home planet.
Yes.
But again, this feels like a point where like the lack of interiority in this book really gets in the way, because I don't understand, like Delany says, why is he reading it this way? Why is he not just like, why is this woman so weird? Like, there's no reason for him. Like, she's not, like, he has no reason. Like, he lives on a planet where this is not how people go about procuring sex. Like, people are very open about their desire and very casual about it. I'm not saying there's no flirting or like joking and sex on Annares. I don't think that is what's implied, but like this idea of like doing this kind of double speak that Via does, you know, playing around with innuendo in this way that in the context of what we're told society on Earth is like where women are basically property makes sense.
Yeah.
But it feels like this point where, again, Le Guin is kind of like yada, yada, yadaing what should be like these central conflicts between these two societies.
Yeah.
And Shevek all of a sudden is Tarzan. He's just like this kind of noble savage, or like maybe ignoble savage.
Yeah.
He just comes from this like different place where people don't do things the way they do here, and it makes him act like an asshole, but not in a way that feels justified or compelling. It's just like, oh, he just stumbles into this because he gets too horny, and it just doesn't ring true. And it feels like a point where, again, there is a moment here for like a really interesting dialogue about like the way sex works in these two cultures and how does it differ, and how might there be interesting misreadings of people's motivations based on that. And instead we just fall back on this trope of just like, oh, the man gets too horny and tries to do like caveman stuff to the pretty lady.
Well, and like, to me, then the existence of that scene only exists to make us think less of Shevek in a blunt way, like in a way of authorial, like the hand emerging on the story, and like, you know, you should think less of Shevek, and now he's ashamed, and he, you know, now he's gonna grow, I guess, or something. Like I don't know. It's like one of those. It feels like she was like playing an interesting scene, and then she just slammed her hand on the piano. Like, to me, if I was like gonna translate it like musically, like darn, you know, like after like doing a nice little run about, you know, like this idea. So. But.
Well, you know, I maybe to give like just an iota of credit to the people in your grad school class, like I do think that there is maybe a little bit something there in terms of like, again, why is this scene here?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, like this is art. You can portray whatever you want. We're free speech warriors here on the Infinite Library.
But it has to be good. Yeah.
It has to be good. Exactly. Yeah. But I think that there is an element here where it's like, okay, so the book is positing Shevek as, again, maybe not perfect, but like a good person throughout like the whole of the story.
Right.
This scene happens. He nearly rapes a woman. And then like the next chapter, we're just supposed to think of him as basically a good person again. And we're supposed to like be rooting for him and want him to like solve his physics problems. And then he, you know, does this heroic thing at the end where he chooses not to be like complicit in, you know, this imperial war effort that he's kind of been covertly conscripted into, and he, you know, tries to go home. And there is something incongruous about that.
It never returns to like the Via or other characters who might think of what happened, or even Shevek's interiority of what happened. It's just dropped more or less.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like, again, if there's a generous reading of Le Guin here, I think that it's this idea of like he has a failed connection. He tries to actually connect with someone on this planet. He feels constantly thwarted in his attempts to connect with people here because he doesn't understand the social cues. The people he maybe wants to connect with don't want to talk to him because they assume, you know, he tries to like bond with his like butler basically.
Yeah.
But his butler like thinks of him as like basically upper class, even though he comes from a society where that's not a thing. So he doesn't want to talk to him on kind of a human to human level. And like, I thought that was a much more interesting relationship, especially once the butler does kind of accidentally open up to him, and it gives Shevek this opening to actually connect.
Yeah.
But he has this failed connection, and that somehow like lets him make this connection in his theory. He's able to connect with like basically Einstein's ideas. He's gotten his hands on what is implied to be like a copy of like Einstein's, you know, treatise on theory of relativity.
Well, but famously Einstein hated quantum mechanics, and I think it's implied that Shevek is able to bridge quantum mechanics with like Einstein general relativity. So
yeah, absolutely. But it's kind of this failure to connect on like a physical level that like inspires him to be able to connect on like an intellectual level with another person who is not, crucially like not there, is like deceased. He's connecting with him on a purely like intellective level. He's creating a strand, Ben.
Yeah, he's realized that all of the universe is just strands. And that when you think about strands, you're creating a strand. So.
We kid. But yeah, it's a really weird scene, and it feels like, I think, again, maybe to give like a little bit of credit to your classmates again, who were a little more squeamish about this. I don't feel like it needed to be this extreme to get the point across. He could just try to come on, like proposition her more openly and just have her react badly to it. He does not have to literally assault her.
Yeah.
To like get this point across that like he doesn't understand social cues on this planet. Even if you're not going to fully dig into the more interesting implications of that idea, about kind of how sex really should look different between these two worlds. Even if you're going to just kind of go for this like, oh, he bumbles into insulting this lady sexually because he thinks that you can just be like, hey, baby, want to fuck? Like, you don't need to like have him do something that feels so abject and gross and then like immediately kind of just like move past it.
That reminds me of Portnoy's complaint where he's just talking about how like he always wished that he could like come up to a lady in the street and say, hey, baby, want to fuck? And then one time he does and she says yes and he's like completely scared. Like he's just like, oh, what have I done? It's a critical scene in Portnoy's complaint where he says, hey, baby, want to fuck? And she's like, yes. And he's like, what? Like, anyway, but yeah, so I think that would have been a better handling of the scene. I agree that it's like, it's using like a hammer when a more delicate approach would have been better. So,
yeah. Well, and again, it's like, and why? And that, again, it feels like kind of my issue with a lot of the stuff on Eurus is like, it gets so like operatically dramatic compared to what's happening on Annares.
Yeah.
That like, it kind of feels like we enter like cartoon world. And everyone's a toon on Earth.
Yeah, it's a toon version of capitalist world. Yeah. Everyone's a capitalist toon.
You know, and even like when he goes to like Delany has a great bit. I'm sorry we keep bringing up the Delany essay, but it really does hammer a lot of the points that, again, like I didn't quite feel like I could articulate before I read it. He has a great bit about how like towards the end of the Urus section, Shevek attends like a labor demonstration and gives like a speech about Odonianism, basically, to like the workers. And Delany says like, this is like a 1930s idea of what a 1910s labor strike was like. Like this very tidy like thing where the workers like just hear the inspirational speech and decide to throw down their chains with no like complexity to it, and then are immediately, you know, put down by the state.
Yeah.
So it feels cartoonish.
Well, and like, it's also like, to me, this is where the book feels rushed, is like after he makes connections with like the political organizers, like it feels like the book is rushing through everything at the end. And so it's like the biggest speech, the biggest demonstration, the most horrifying reality where like people are machine gunned basically, like, you know, as soon as he makes the speech, like in graphic detail too. I don't know. It's very like, I need to show this is the worst reality, basically, like as quickly as possible. So,
yeah, the Annares sections, like, again, they have like bits that maybe don't work perfectly. They have points of critique, but like they feel realer.
Yeah.
Like they feel like, you know, the dialogue, despite kind of being stilted, feels realer in a way. Whereas once we get to Urus, like everyone just feels like a cartoon character to me.
Yeah. See, so to me, that's when the book uses this like interesting thought experiment to then critique like the way we live now, like in heavily applied scare quotes, where I'm often like, what I'm reading to see where the point's being made, like in terms of like, like controlled expression or like people lying covertly or like capitalist expansion, like that kind of stuff. And like, definitely not my favorite parts of the book, but I still think it's interesting. Well, I don't know. I was reading the bit when he goes to the Terran embassy. I don't know if we have enough time to get into this. I find that part to be extremely confusing because I know that like Terra exists as a world in Ursula Guinn's universe. And like, but again, it's almost like I need this to be applicable to the way we live now. So I'm going to have Shevek basically like look at the reader and go, it's not too late for you to become an Odonian. like you too can live, you know, in permanent revolution. Like, I know I'm acting like you can't, but you can. Like, so, and I find that kind of charming, even though like it almost feels like I don't know, the scene where he talks to the Terran person, the Terran person's like, we blew it. Like, you know, we let climate change get so bad that we had to do central command of resources. Like, it's too late for us. And Chevic's like, it's not, you know? So I don't know. I'm okay with some of the idealism of this book because I like the ideas so much. But I do recognize that, like, yeah, it gets a little, there's a little too much axe grinding. I think I found an Ursula Guinn essay where she was like, my book has some axe grinding. And I think it's better to say that it has like a lot. But anyway, like, what did you think of the Terran scene? Like, I don't know if we have enough time to get in. Like, did you buy the ambassador as like an Earth lady saying like, you know, we blew it basically?
So I found it interesting because like I found myself I found myself interested because it's the first time we encounter a Terran, so an Earth human.
Yeah.
It's not explicitly stated in the book, but it's implied. I felt like I was getting the implication, and then with a little background research, I confirmed my suspicions. The Setians, which are the humans, because they are humans who exist on Annares and Uras, are not the descendants of colonists from Earth.
Okay.
They are actually like basically humans were seeded like throughout the galaxy by a third civilization called the Hainish.
That's what
in the distant past, and so. And the Hainish are also humans. So there's kind of this thing where there's a lot more of humanity throughout the galaxy than you would expect, but it's not kind of the classic idea of like, oh, we left Earth and Earth is still like the homeland of everyone. So like they refer to the Terrans as aliens because they are basically like they like these people do not have anything culturally in common with the Setian humans. Which is, I think, a very interesting kind of subversion of how things usually go in these stories. In terms of like kind of, again, the bit where it's like, you don't understand. We can still have anarchism. It's not too late. Well, I mean, maybe it's not too late, Ursula K. Le Guin, but I don't want to live on Annares. I think it sounds kind of bad. And I don't think Le Guin is being like totally I don't think that's Le Guin's point necessarily. I think there's a point there about like, again, the world can be different. We're not doomed.
Yeah.
And again, I think that, again, this feels like kind of a bit where I think the book doesn't quite go as far as I want it to. I want there to be like more actual like conflict between like, okay, Annares is the society where people are free, but it's bleak and it's, you know, hemmed in this way. Whereas Uras, like, there is freedom, there's art, there's culture, there's high culture and religion and, you know, a greater amount of like freedom to think. And it feels like this thing where Le Guin is like kind of trying to like, I think, posit like, what is a society would actually like be able to like an anarchist society would function on without like kind of backsliding back towards something more familiar. But I think like initially, I think the book like wants you to be thinking like, is Annares something worth aiming for, or is it actually like a really depressing, you know, is it a utopia, or is it just kind of its own flavor of dystopia?
Yeah.
But I think that, again, Uras is portrayed as so cartoonishly bad that doesn't feel like it's a serious question by the end of the book, especially when we see also that there are further alternatives. Obviously, the Terrans are kind of this like even more dystopian society than either Annares or Uras. The Terran ambassador says that Uras, like his people think of it as basically paradise.
Right.
Because the earth sucks so bad now. And then we have the Hainish, who again are human, but are almost like feel kind of like high elves. They're like this totally like spacefaring civilization. There's like kind of little bits of like the like Federation from Star Trek in there. Like they like exploring new worlds and meeting new people, and they have like this incredibly long historical record.
Yeah. So the guy that wants to go on to Annares at the end of the book, who's driving Shevek home, he's a Hainish, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It was funny imagining him just being like a guy that's like read a lot of Karl Marx, and he's like, I think I'm ready to join the USSR. Like, and then like Shevek, who's like a Russian scientist, is like, are you sure? Like, yeah. So like,
I feel like there's kind of this like little bit of undercutting here and there, where again you have this dyadic relationship, this dialectical relationship, but I just don't feel like it takes the dialectic seriously enough. Like, what amount of suffering is like high culture or civilization as we understand it worth? Is it better for everyone to live like a bleak, meager existence equally, compared to there being inequality, but it means that you can have art and beauty in the world? And it just feels like Uras is not treated seriously enough as a setting to make that dialectic feel meaningful.
Yeah, and that's also when I wonder if this book would have like, you know, ballooned in page count. Like if you were attempting to maybe like do an equal representation of everything, because it almost feels like Uras exists to make Annares feel more real, as opposed to them being like equally real. And so like, I think you can even note there's like a distinct shift in the way Annares is portrayed through all the chapters, where like it feels really good and looks really cool, and then it gets more and more like realistic as the story goes on. But I don't know, I'm somewhat charmed by Odu. I feel like the idea of like comparing, like putting Taoism with like Kropotnik is like an interesting combination. Yeah, or Kropotnik. Sorry, yeah, it's like an interesting. How do you pronounce his name?
Kropotkin.
Kropotkin. Yeah, not Kropotnik. Yeah. I think putting Taoism with Kropotnik, I don't know if I can even say it right. It's cool because like the idea, like, can you imagine like Marx saying like, yeah, it's like permanent revolution, like, you know, the idea of like Marxism not as a science, but as some I guess what I mean is I like that this book treats these ideas as like also having a morality, because I feel like she's very interested in the ethical implications of what Shevek does as a scientist, as well as like the ethical implications of Odu's philosophy. And I feel like I can't think of a fictional world that does something that serious. It sounds like Delany's book does when we read it next episode. So it'll be interesting to see how he does it. But I find that to be pretty cool. And to me, that gives the book a interesting charge that seems to, again, imply a greater book than the one that you're actually reading. So,
yeah, I mean, I agree with you there to some degree. I think that, like, obviously there have been a lot of books where you have like a sci-fi writer weirdo be like, here's my ideal society. We should do this.
I mean, Burton even does it in the beginning of Anatomy of Melancholy. He's like, here's how I would run England, by the way. Like, and it's like, it's deranged. Anyway, yeah.
It is a long storied tradition in the genre.
Yeah.
And I think that the fact that Le Guin both A, takes her ideas very seriously, but B, also is like not blind to potential flaws in those ideas, and like wants to seriously think about like the limits of them, is cool and good. And it does give like an interesting like ideological frisson to the text. I mean, I'm a Thuvian. I think we should have socialism and we should have the state.
Yeah, central, total centralization. Everything's controlled. Yeah.
So my ideology does not get a full airing in this book. Perhaps for the best.
Yeah, Shevek goes there and meets the equivalent of Stalin.
or Xi Jinping.
Yeah, or Xi Jinping. Yeah, he meets the Thuvian equivalent of Xi Jinping.
And what he learns, wow, you can still have markets within a socialist society to provide high quality goods for workers.
Who would have thought? Not Odu. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so I appreciate that. I do think you're right, Ben. I think there is like Well, I do feel like it gets thought experimenty at times, like the fact that Le Guin is trying to like think through the implications of the society, even if it does like sometimes not quite get as far as I'd like.
Yeah.
Considering most people write these sorts of things to imagine either killing their inferiors or having an entire society dedicated to fulfilling their specific sexual kinks.
Yeah.
This one's pretty good by comparison.
Oh yeah, yeah. If you ever look at the like pulpy sci-fi paperbacks at like half price, it's like a lot of them are just like computer bimbos, all for me. Like, yeah, so.
Have you ever read? Not to get too off topic, but maybe an interesting pairing with this book. Actually, have you ever read The Iron Dream by Norman Spinrad?
I really want to read it. I know about it. I have not actually read it. So
great book, listeners. For those of you who have not heard of this book, it is I don't know what to call it exactly, but it's a book by Norman Spinrad. But the majority of the text itself is a fictitious book, also called The Iron Dream, which is written by an alternate universe version of Adolf Hitler, where after failing out of art school in like the 1920s, he moves to America and becomes a pulp science fiction writer. And, writes a thinly veiled screed about how not, eugenics and fascism are super cool.
Truly one of the best like sci-fi thought experiments. What if Adolf Hitler was a pulp sci-fi writer? So
I feel like Le Guin is employing like a well-worn trope in the genre of like imagining a quote unquote utopia and telling us a story through that.
Yeah,
but also like it is not like, again, this thing where she's just like salivating at the idea of like murdering people or like, creating an entire society dedicated to like everything being exactly the way she wants it to be.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, I think that is a much more like fruitful and interesting like method of thinking about these things. Even if, again, I think that she doesn't go quite as far as I'd like. And I don't want to be like somebody who's like taking a look at a book that was written 50 years ago and being like, well, why didn't she think about trans people more? Why didn't she think about XYZ more? And that's a totally fair like critique of my critique that I am doing that. And that's why I'm feeling let down by this in some way. And, maybe that is a fair critique, but I think that like I feel a little disappointed. I really wanted to like this book. I kind of went in with a kind of a sinking feeling, just kind of knowing when it was written and the type of book that it was, that I was going to be a little unhappy with kind of the didacticism and whatnot. And I was really hoping that Le Guin's strength as a writer would overcome that and that I would end up enjoying it more. And I didn't hate it, but I don't think like I did not enjoy this nearly as much as I enjoyed the Earthsea novels. And obviously they're very, very different, but I didn't even find the language to be quite like as much like the language didn't even feel like it really elevated things,
Yeah.
There's a lot of points where the language I think ends up feeling very muddy and you don't quite know what she's trying to illustrate with the words she's using. There's a bit at the very beginning where she's talking about this wall and she says it devolves into mere geometry rather than having a gate. And that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Like that's just stringing words together and just kind of hoping that your reader will invent what you mean because you didn't write something that meant anything.
Yeah, and there's parts where the book becomes almost like deliberately unclear, like when Shevik makes his great science fiction realization where he bridges the two theories. It's like it feels like it's happening like behind like an opaque surface, and you're just like, oh, he did it. Yeah,
that was a moment that felt very much like someone who had never actually studied physics being like, I need to figure out how to write about someone knowing about physics, which I cannot critique Le Guin for entirely. I don't expect her to be like a PhD physics genius, but it is kind of hard to like it kind of feels like, again, it feels like a version of the problem where it's like, oh, if you write a novel about a great poet and then you have to like put some of his poetry in the book.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you do that when you're not a great poet?
Well, I think the idea, it makes sense. Like, you know, I read a book a while back where some physicists were like, you know, supposedly like the speed of light is fixed by Albert Einstein. You know, it's so many thousands of miles per second. And they basically said, what if it went just a little bit faster? and they took that like as a given, and they came up with some interesting stuff. So it's like the idea of taking certain things as a given, which Shevik supposedly does to solve this problem, like makes sense. It's just, it would be way more complicated than that. So
yeah,
like,
yeah. But no, I just felt this way where she kind of like has to like put a screen up for a second and just be like, believe me, there's some fascinating intellectual labor happening behind the screen.
Well, yeah,
there's a great, he's having an epiphany, trust me.
Well, that happens there. That happens when Shevik commits the sexual assault, and that happens when we're inside Bedap's head and we're like, he's realizing that maybe he should have kids. Like, like I don't know, like it's like a similar thing that she does where she's almost like, I need to just sort of, this happened and I can't go into detail. So, but.
Well, do we have any final thoughts? I feel like we're probably coming up towards time here.
I feel like we've mentioned everything. And yeah, I don't know if I have anything else to say. I don't think there was any other quotes. Oh, I mean, so, I did want to bring up another of her books that I haven't actually read, but I thought would be interesting as like a final note, or like, so I wanted to mention that at some point Ursula Guinn writes a book called Always Coming Home, which I think consists of only anthropological studies. Like the idea that she did like anthropological, like it's like the novel is like a dossier of documents about the society that she's constructed in like California. And so like when you read the table of contents, it's like it's written as if it's like a bunch of like primary sources, like, which to me seems like an interesting attempt at her like really going down on the anthropology. And I wonder if that like solves some of the problems that we're discussing here with like trying to do, you know, characters and plot and realizations when you could just give us the goods, so to speak. And so I'm quite interested in reading that book. I tried to read it and then I got distracted, and like I've looked at the table of contents though, and it's all like describing like a tale from this culture, like written as is, you know, like studies about the culture's history, like that kind of stuff. So,
okay. That does sound interesting. I have not heard of this book, but I love me some like fake primary sources.
Yeah, like so for instance, where is it? The first part consists mostly of cache texts and records of oral performances interspersed with Pandora's commentary, accounts of a few aspects of cache life, and personal essays. The longest text is a personal history narrated by a woman called Stone Telling. Yeah, so it's like, what if I just did, you know, ethnography on my society? Like that almost to me feels like the most Ursula Guinn method I've ever heard, which is why I'm wondering if it like solves any of these problems or not. Who's to say? Maybe I'll read it one day.
Well, maybe we'll read it for the book sometime in the future, or read it for the pod sometime in the future. Cool. Well, I guess that is our episode on The Dispossessed, an ambiguous episode for an ambiguous utopia.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect.
Well, listeners, thank you so much for joining us. I hope that, you know, if you really love this book, like I know a lot of people do, you don't get too mad about our critiques. Rest assured, Ben loves this book.
I mean,
I thought it was fine.
yeah. Today, this was the dialectical construction. So, yeah.
I criticize because I care, and because, like I said, Le Guin is someone who I do like, and I felt kind of sad that I didn't like this book more. And I don't know, that I feel like when you kind of are disappointed by an author you admire, there's something fruitful there in terms of thinking about it. So I hope that came across over the course of this episode. I will say I'm very much looking forward to talking about Triton next week. Ben, I haven't mentioned this to you, but I think I've decided like Delany is going to be like my project author for the year.
Oh, wow. Hell yeah.
I'm going to start off with this one, and I'm just going to do like a big Delany deep dive over the year. I have the book of essays that To Read the Dispossessed is in on my nightstand right now. I've got a couple other things by him that I'm planning on picking through over the course of the year. Going to try to get to Dahlgren at some point, probably in the summer.
Dahlgren is pretty great. Yeah.
Listeners, be prepared for a lot more Delany content, even if it's just me saying it in passing.
Yeah, John's taking the Delany pill. So
I'm not going to read Hog, though. I'm not going to read the weird sadomasochistic, like, gay rape pornography. That I'm not ready for that yet.
One of my favorite things about Hog is like multiple people going, it can't be that bad, and then immediately going, it's bad. Like almost everyone I know who said that they like read Hog went from being like, it can't be that, like there can't be a reason why he didn't publish it for like 20 years, and there is.
I mean, obviously, I'm not going to probably even get to like a tenth of his work, even reading him, regularly for this year. But very excited to do a deep dive into a guy who, I started reading for the show and have really since fallen in love with his oeuvre. So, not to make our episode about Le Guin more about Samuel Delany than I already made it, but maybe you listener can understand why I've been talking so much about Samuel Delany in this episode.
And if I can say one last word, I feel like I read Dispossessed at a more idealistic time in my life, and rereading it for this episode just kind of reminded me of that. And so I think, not to say that it's like, I don't know, a youthful experience, but I feel like that idealism is important, especially now. And so I think that's why it hit me kind of hard. So
that's fair. I get you. Definitely books I have in my life that feel similar. That's how I felt reading the culture novels by Ian Banks back in the day.
Hell yeah.
So another anarchist utopia, albeit one with more stuff. Like, I don't mean that in terms of like ideological content. I mean like the culture just has more stuff than the Anarians do. Anyway. Thank you for joining us, listeners. We will be back in 2 weeks with our episode on Triton by Samuel R. Delany. Until then, semper books and stay woke.
Semper books, stay woke.
Thank you for listening to The Infinite Library. If you liked our show, we hope you'll subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the podcast app of your choice. It helps us a lot. If you want to follow us on social media, we can be found on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Infinite Library Pod. If you'd like to contact our team directly with episode ideas or feedback, you can email us at infinitelibrarypod@gmail.com. Our intro music is by Amos Legend in the Forest of Mayhem. Our outro music is by DJ Daggy Diggs, and our logo was created by Lars Noir.